Welcome to Dark Loops. And why is this so good? Welcome to Dark Loops, and why is this so good? I'm your host, Dr. Scott Jordan, a.k.a. Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist, philosopher from Illinois State University. And tonight, we discuss Octavia Butler's landmark, rather timely novel, Parable of the Sower. Published in 1993, the novel was on the New York Times Notable Book of the Year list in 1994. In 1995, it was nominated for a Nebula Award for the Best Novel, and in 2020 became a New York Times bestseller on September 3rd, appearing on the trade book paperback fiction list. Joining me in tonight's discussion are some amazing Octavia Butler fans. Please introduce yourselves and tell us your favorite Parable of the Sower memory.
My name is Cianna Greaves. I am a public radio producer out of Baltimore, Maryland. My favorite Parable of the Sower memory, I guess that really resonates with me, is the whole beginning of the book and Lauren's relationship with her father. I love stories about fathers and daughters. I was very, very close with my dad. It's very rare that we have stories that focus on that relationship, especially within the Black family. So that was always something that really, really stuck with me and that really resonated with me about Parable of the Sower. And sort of that feeling of once, when Lauren loses her family, that feeling of being lost and really having to reach inside yourself to really draw on the lessons of your elders. It's, having lost my parents at a young age, it was quite a process for me to sort of come to the realization that those lessons are actually there with you. And your ancestors, your family members, your tribe, they really do leave an imprint on you. They definitely imprint on you. So, that's something that really stuck with me with that book.
That's fantastic. And since you brought it up, if we were all going to chat about that for a second, that's my favorite relationship of the story, because she is her father in a different time.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Her father teaches her everything she needs to learn to get through this world. Even though they argue, there's this beautiful paradox of, in order for a child to become an adult, they will do that work against their parent. That's just life, right? And the parents got to be there for that work to be done.
But she found her parent again at the end.
Yes, exactly.
Which was annoying.
I'll
wait.
No. Sistah LM, you go next.
Hello, I am L. Marie, also known as Literary Marie or Sistah LM. And my favorite Parable memory would be when it first came out around 1993. I was still in middle school. So our English grade teacher was reading it. And I remember one day during lunch, and I asked her, "No, what are you reading? You seem like really into this book." And she said, "Well, it's a really good tale so far, and it's probably how the world is going to be in the 2020s.
Wow.
And so she gave me a few examples. And of course, me as a seventh grader, I'm thinking, okay, no, we'll always have cars, especially because I'm in the Motor City. We'll always use gas. There will not be a shortage of water. And I'm just combating her with everything she comes at me with that she's reading. And I remember her saying to me, "Just you wait. Just you wait."
Wow. Do you keep in touch with that teacher at all?
I actually ran into her a few years ago at the casino.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic story.
Wow.
Vanessa.
So I am Dr. Vanessa Hintz, licensed clinical psychologist in the Milwaukee area, also professor of psychology, professional nerd, geek, all of those good things. For me, I guess I really identified with Lauren's sort of otherness throughout, especially in the beginning of the book. You know, she sort of othered from her dad. You know, he's traditionally religious, and she's sort of going off on her own thing. But I really identify with that. Growing up in a family where I was always the smart sister or like the smart girl, you know, and not necessarily a bad thing, but always feeling just othered and different, and not getting to a place where that difference was something I celebrated rather than ran away from until I was in graduate school. But I think Lauren's sort of story and the way she just really embraced that from the jump, it really resonated with me, and it was inspiring. I don't want to be dramatic, but I really appreciated it for sure.
No, that's fantastic. That's one of the powers of fiction. I remember being a teenager reading about people I'd never met, and they were expressing life values that I wasn't seeing in my world. And I remember recently talking to a dear friend and saying, you know, when I was young, I read this book, I read this character, and I always wanted to be like him. And she said, well, you are. And I said, oh, wow. Fiction works, man. It was pretty cool. Okay. Jennifer?
I'm Jennifer Lewis Williams, a.k.a. Sistah Jay, for those of y'all that listen to the podcast. And, you know, I was trying to remember when I read this book. It was sometime in the 90s, but it wasn't right when it first came out. What impressed me, I think, the most about this, being a writer, and I'm a published author as well, and that is what I like the most about it is written in first person, but you don't get a sense that it's all about her. That's really difficult to do. You know, you get a sense of the whole setting, what resonated the most for me is the pictures of the neighborhoods, because I grew up in a neighborhood where we were on the black block, and right across the street was 5 blocks of the white block, but all the kids played together and we all went to school together. But it was, you know, during that whole busing and all that stuff. So neighborhoods are very vivid to me, and that's what I like the most about this. I didn't identify with the siblings and stuff. I'm the baby, so I'm real spoiled. But in my family, I'm not only a twin, but I'm the younger twin. My brother's 15 minutes older than me, so I'm forever the baby. It doesn't matter, you know, how old I get. I'm always the baby. But there are certain privileges to that. So some of the attitudes and things that she expressed, I could not relate to, because she was the oldest. And not only was she the oldest, she had a stepmother. I don't have that experience, although my father died when I was a kid. So I could identify with that. But it was the first person account. I'm really impressed with writers who can write in first person and you get everyone's perspective, or you feel like you do anyway, but it's first person.
Very well said.
Yeah.
Stanford.
Hi, I'm Stanford Carpenter, or Dr. Stanford Carpenter. I'm a cultural anthropologist. Before that, I was actually, I worked as an archaeologist for a while. I also do make some comics here and there. What resonated for me, it's a very layered. Parable of the Sower was a very layered experience for me, because one of my good friends is one of the creators of the graphic novel. So as I was rereading it, I was also talking with him a lot about his experiences making it. And one of the things that struck him the most was also something that had a parallel resonance for me, which is for him, it was that he was illustrating trauma, right? And what is it like to spend a day illustrating trauma, illustrating people being massacred and destroyed, and then to just have to shut it off and go to bed at night, right? And so sometimes he would call me after he shut it off to go to bed at night, and we talk about it, right? But at the same time, what was interesting to me, or not interesting is probably not the right word. I guess I'm being a little distant because it was so close, is what the trauma was doing, right? Watching, so reading something where the family is being torn apart, right? And then watching the journey and watching them bring the family back together, and like looking at it and experience it as these cycles of trauma, and at the same time seeing these characters just, they lose family and then they create new family. They lose more family along the way. They create new family. And those types of stories where stories that talk about kinship, not just as something that's blood, but also as something that you choose, that you have to work at and purposely assert. Those are the narratives that always interest me, because that's always been the nature of the family that I'm a part of.
That's fantastic.
Well said. I like that.
Yes.
Well said. Well said.
And dare I say, the whole family falling apart, creating new family, that's all reflected in the philosophy of Earthseed, right? God is change, and there's passages about destruction. There's passages about chaos. There's passages about action. So I'm Scott Jordan, and my favorite parable memory is just the first bit of Earthseed I read. And you're going to hear me freak out about Earthseed tonight, and that's because I'm in the papers I write as a philosopher, cognitive scientist. I try to deconstruct the notion of stability, right? I try to deconstruct the idea that anything is stable because of itself. And if we come to the understanding, dare I say, that all stability is scale relative, which means all stabilities are stable in relation to some other scale of change. A mountain, for example, is only stable at our rate of change, but at a smaller rate of change or a faster rate of change, a mountain is incredibly unstable. When you get a grip on the relative nature of stability, that's what Earthseed's about. And I saw that, and then I saw how this author used the philosophy and connected it with the details of lived life in a brilliant way that I hadn't seen before. I said, this is special. This is something I've not seen. And so I was in 100%. So here's what we're going to do. Each of us is going to explain why this book sticks out to us as being so good. Okay, I'll go first. So, Cianna already said she had notes, so I feel good because I have notes as well.
I do too.
I do too.
Me too.
If you go on,
Adults, Scott.
There you go. If you go online and type in Earthseed, Book of the Living, you'll find it. There is the Book of the Living on the internet with all 60 plus passages that she wrote in this book. So what I absolutely love about this novel is that it tells a philosophy that I've worked a long time in my life to try to say analytically. It tells it moment to moment through lived life. And so there are three things that I think stick out in Earthseed. One is the question of what is God? The other is the question, what I call stable instabilities, where she gets to this idea that all stability is scale relative. And then there's one little passage where she talks about, I'll talk about the passage, and for me, it reveals the problem with words and the way we experience words and what words really do. So if you don't mind, I'm going to quote a little Earthseed here. You should all feel free to interrupt, right? Let's just have a conversation. And actually the first The first dimension I think of Earthseed that I absolutely love is what is God. And I'm going to jump not to her first quote, but all the way down to the 31st passage where it says sculptor and clay. And here's the passage: as wind, as water, as fire, as life, God is both creative and destructive, demanding and yielding, sculptor and clay. God is infinite potential. God is change. So what I just see things like that and my mind goes, and the reason is because for 400 years, Western philosophy has been taking stability for granted and then focusing on how things change. So you take a ball and you roll it down an inclined plane and you create a calculus to quantify change. And you go ahead.
I disagree. I don't believe that that's what the major emphasis with Western civilization is. It seems to me, of course, I'm a retired lawyer. I forgot to say that. So, everything is a little different. But to me, the biggest thing is cause and effect.
Yes.
You roll this ball, that causes this effect.
Yes.
So to me, that's what almost everything in our world is put together with, or they try to make it be glued together with cause and effect.
No, I totally agree. And so when you're creating that equation, right, of A plus B equals C, you're never asking yourself, you're looking at the change that results from the interaction of two things, but you're never asking yourself, what are the interactions that create those things? And then you say, well, what are the interactions that produce those things? And you keep going down and down.
Those interactions are going to be the effect of some cause. You see what I'm saying?
Well, okay, it depends. No, this is good stuff.
The chicken and the egg. Which came first, the chicken or the egg,
Okay, so you're absolutely right.
For me, anyway, that's the way I look at it.
No, this is awesome. So for me, the chicken and the egg is right. What I would argue is what we're chicken and egging is whether or not we start with things and then look at causality, or where we start with change and look at how stabilities can exist in change. And what I like to focus on is how a ball on an implant can even be a ball that whole time. And what I get to philosophically when I do that is the idea that God is change is God. That underlying all of reality is flux. And then stabilities emerge within flux. And what that does is get to the idea that every cause is an effect, every effect is a cause, right? And the universe, whatever reality, is a never-ending. If we're going to talk about cause and effect, there's nothing that isn't a cause and there's nothing that isn't an effect. So
but there's nothing that's not real, because everything is real.
Yes, thank you for saying so. That is the whole point. Dreams are just as real as bricks. Oh my God, I never thought I'd get to say that today, but dreams are just as real as bricks. And there are cultures in this world that get that, right? 80% of the world's population lives in what are called holist cultures that see themselves as manifestations of reality as opposed to things in reality that are causing things. 20% of the world's population lives in individualist cultures based on what you talk about, cause and effect. And that, by the way, is the United States and Europe, right? So the vast majority of the population of the planet not just thinks, but experiences itself as part of everything. And once you think that way, it doesn't mean it doesn't mean you live in the world of right and wrong, good and bad. You live in the world of managing. And I like that emphasis on manage as opposed to being right or being wrong. Mm-hmm. And I really experience this novel as an expression of living in management as opposed to living to be right or wrong. And
well,
yeah.
I mean, can I go ahead?
Go ahead, anyone.
No, Vanessa, please.
I just wanted to add to that, just sort of like, it really spoke to me as a therapist, and as someone who most often when people come in to my office, they feel like they're living in the wrong and they want to move into the right. And 99% of what I do as a therapist is try to get people to be in the managing space that you're talking about. So that quote that you mentioned, God is both creative and destructive, the therapy that I do, not, like I said, 99% of it, 99.99% of it is getting people to the place where, because I think that we live in a society where, especially like emotion wise, like all this toxic positivity, and like we always got to be happy, and if you're not happy, something wrong with you. If you're angry, something wrong with you. Like, which that is just not realistic, nor is that our way as people. And so that really, like what you just said to me, can like translate so seamlessly into like my therapeutic practice. Because again, when people come in, it's not about let's get you out of depression and into happiness. Let's teach you how to manage whatever comes your way, whether it's depression, happiness, sadness, anxiety, whatever it is. You got to manage it. You know what I'm saying? Because it just is what it is. So I really, that really spoke to me.
That's fantastic. Stanford, you wanted to say something?
I mean, as you guys were talking about cause and effect, the thing that was coming to my mind was the Western culture's obsession with two things. One is the census, and two is linear time. And
yes.
And I think that when you pull yourself away from a rigid definition of the census and a rigid reliance on the census, it's like, I see it, therefore it must be real, right? And it's only now that you're really seeing a lot more science coming out about, they're starting to grapple with different sensorial experiences. I think that there's something about that very much holds us back and very much limits us. So like, for example, when we look, the best example, it's going to sound weird, would be there's people who study birds, right? And one of the things about birds is that they see things that we don't see. They see into areas of the electromagnetic spectrum that we can't see. Yeah. So birds that appear brown to us, actually to other birds, appear more colorful than the birds that we see as colorful. And it's just because we can't see the same colors that they see, right? And it's our inability to grasp that, to limit ourselves to our own particular senses, right? Mm-hmm. And to grasp how radically different another being's senses could be. Mm-hmm. It really limits our ability to actually think even about how the world functions, right? Because it renders us unable to even try and get our hands around our own blindness, right? And it makes us that much more singular, and it makes us that much more selfish, by definition, right? Like we literally have not truly honed our ability to see outside ourselves as a species, and then how that reflects on us as an individual is significant.
Western culture has spent a lot of time defining itself against the concept called nature, right? And that dualism is completely consistent with what you were just talking about. Whereas 80% of the world's population, I don't even think they make a human nature distinction. They are of, in, and about reality. And, why are you making that distinction?
Lauren and her family. And then that's when we sort of have to remember that Lauren isn't really of a Western culture. I mean, there are a lot of West African parables and I guess West African or African and also Afro-Caribbean.
Well, but I disagree, because her father was a Baptist minister. That's how she described him to other people. Mm-hmm. Being a Baptist, and I was raised in a Baptist church.
Me too.
Being a Baptist minister is a very distinct, defined thing. Mm-hmm. There are very, very distinct, defined parameters that you're supposed to be within to be called a Baptist minister. That's very Western, it seems to me. Mm-hmm. I mean, the only Africanness that I got from the book was whenever Ben Cole would call her Olamina as opposed to Lauren. Mm-hmm. Right. Because, but the way it played in my mind, it was like very, very melodic, almost like music. But other than her name, I did not get a sense of any kind of Africanness. And actually, by the time, I think it's probably even more than halfway through the book, is when the character Emery and her daughter come up and or are introduced. But they finally get the backstory that she's the slave. That's at the point where I rolled my eyes. Because.
So let me.
What do you mean by the slave? Why did you roll your eyes?
Oh, I rolled my eyes because it's a personal thing I have with me. Mm-hmm. I like reading books by Black authors, period. But I don't always want the book to carry me back to slavery. Our lives are so much richer,
right,
and more, and this is my personal opinion, more important and more creative than that. Mm-hmm. I thought the way she wove in the slavery aspects was not as good as she did in other books. Mm.
Do you think?
So for me,
I don't think that it was. I guess my reaction to the slavery elements is I was so caught up in their journey that it made me think about another aspect of African American and Afro-Caribbean and South African or South American African experience, which is marriage, right? This idea that you can escape, that you don't escape by going to where it's safe. You escape by going to where it's hard, and you escape by going to a place that's so hard that they won't follow you. Right. And I think that the other thing that we're also not talking about, and it gets back to notions of the senses, and also moving away from her as a purely Western subject, which is what Cianna was talking about, is, you cannot look at her character outside of her empathic abilities. And her empathic abilities actually creates a realm, a type of sense that violates a lot of our Western notions of order, of self, and other, and I think that I have to follow Cianna on that and saying that she's definitely not she's not a Western subject.
But African, or being from Africa, or having African background is not the only background that has empathic abilities or mystical abilities, or for me anyway, I just did not connect that to her. I thought she was.
Well, maybe that's just me personally as a first generation American. That was something that I was able to identify and
relate to.
Well, the thing about the father being a Baptist minister, she was raised in that world. So what I experienced that character experiencing is a tension in loving her father and not at all being able to identify with his worldview.
Right.
And what I hear her trying to do is tell a holist narrative in a world where no one else is. Right.
True.
And how do you put that together? And there are actually scenes where she says, "Oh my God, what the hell am I doing? I have no idea what all this means. I need to learn so much more." And what it's clear to me is that she's struggling to. And Octavia Butler is, by the way, masterfully doing us a huge favor, bringing a holist narrative to Western culture through the interaction. And I would argue that the father was the fulcrum of her identity, right? And her interaction with him.
I think so.
And so when the fact that Butler wrote her to be so indecisive about thought, but completely decisive about action, right? I'm going to live and no one's taking me out. I'm going to do what I need to do. That's what my dad taught me to do. Worldviews aside, I guess I should build one that's consistent with how all this is playing out, right?
And not only worldviews aside, but also community views aside. She grew up being the preacher's kid. So everyone in that community expected her to act like the preacher's kid, to preach what her dad gets up and preaches, and to stand by his beliefs. So at the same time, I was able to connect with her inner conflict, because here you are, your community and your family want you to be a certain way, and you're thinking completely differently.
But I also think that when you once you have the moment where everything gets torn apart, right? The dad as a Baptist minister goes from being like a big part of the world to being just a small piece of the world, right? And I think that that's something that's also something I find to be really interesting and even as we talk about like where does him being a Baptist minister fit in this? It's like when I think of it a little differently, because I realize that in certain spaces being a Baptist minister can be everything. And in certain spaces, Christianity can be everything. But then there are other spaces in which Christianity just gets absorbed, you know. And I'm thinking about contrasting, you know, certain specific American contexts with, say, let's say Haiti, right? You know, look at what happens to Catholicism when it tries to run into Haiti. It gets, you know, it looks like Catholicism, but it's completely co-opted, right? It is, you know, that's a moment where the world is asserting, nah, you're just a piece of the world. You are not the world, right? And I think that that's one of the things that's interesting about this book is that, like, is it actually starts with a moment like that. It starts with a gated community where everything seems to, like, be holding the world at bay to the point where we mistake it for being the world. But once those gates come down, you realize.
So, Vanessa, why is this book so good to you?
Interestingly enough, like, I read this book because you suggested it to me. So I was just kind of like, all right, I'm going to just read it. Cool. We're in quarantine. Like, let's just see what happens. And initially I was like so pissed. I was like, why did Scott tell me to read this book? Like, it is not good. Like, what is happening? It started off so slow to me. And I don't know if it was just like it was too much emotion in the time that we're already like dealing with a lot. Like, I don't know, but I was so mad until the part where it got real for me was when Keith, you know, started going out and doing whatever he was doing and living his best life. I was like, okay.
No, I was so mad.
Oh my gosh.
I was so mad. I said, ooh, snatch and get that boy.
I was mad at him.
He was doing the most. Oh my God, the most. And so, I just thought this is like, you know, like a pretty tame book. He'll go out, he'll see the light, and he'll come back. And then none of that happened. So
and that's what I expected too.
Yes,
he'll find his way back.
He showed, man, and he was bringing the monies, like what I don't even know. And so that's when it really started to take off for me. And I was like, okay, yes, like let's just keep going. But I think something that was really interesting to me was the hyper empathy piece, the sharing piece, and that's namely because I'm a therapist, and empathy is something we do and talk about a lot. But I think the sort of juxtaposition between like Lauren sharing, but then like when she is sort of described by others as like, I don't really know what you're thinking. Like, you're kind of just always like, what you got going on there? But then when she's sharing and she's so just overwhelmed by it, it was just such an interesting juxtaposition for me, because I think the way that sort of the word empathy has been co-opted in mainstream society is I think people use it as an excuse just to be nosy and be all up in people's business. Like, I'm so empathic, tell me everything. Like, no.
I agree with your comment about the empathy piece, because what I really liked with what Octavia Butler did with that part of her character is, even though she was she was a feeler, as I think somebody called her, but she was debilitated with it.
Yes.
That's what was so intriguing to me.
Yes.
But also, when you mentioned the part about where people outside of her family were what you never gave on, that's because her father, her Western Baptist father, taught her how to do that, taught her
Mhm.
how to be sneaky, taught her how to hide it.
Yes.
And I thought that was very, very well done, without like belaboring the point, in words like he told her this and this and this. It was very good. I like that.
And how often, think about it, that our parents teach us, or you teach your children to relate to others, be a chameleon when you need to.
Yes.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, sometimes you have to hide how you feel.
Yes.
And sometimes you have to just keep certain people out of your life.
Right.
Like you just have to. And
Really.
Yeah.
what I love about that is that it all comes back to the idea of management, right? And I love your insight that
Now
empathy
I see what
costs.
you're talking about management. Yeah.
Empathy costs.
Yeah.
And empathy is something I study. And when I talk about it, I can't stand exactly what you talked about, Vanessa. Everybody assuming that empathy means we're nice. No.
No.
Empathy means I'm gonna let some of y'all in and keep a lot of you out because when I let your emotions in, what's that? What do you say?
I can't relate, as a lawyer and a criminal one at that. I just can't relate to the empathy thing. I mean, way before I became a lawyer, people say, "Oh, you're so mean." Yeah, well, whatever. But because I think every person, and when I'm reading fiction, I read a lot of thrillers, suspense, science fiction, but I expect these characters to be responsible for themselves, to be responsible for their behavior, because that's the way I look at myself and others. And we're not talking about the children, either in the story or in reality, because they're children, because somebody's teaching them stuff. But at some point, you're responsible. You are responsible.
I have to tell you, I raise my kids, love everybody at different distances. Right? And because, and to go back to your point, Vanessa, the concept of empathy has been completely co-opted in a binary that actually allows people to pretend that they're good.
Thank you.
And
so much for saying that.
Yeah.
I don't
manipulate and gaslight others. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Empath. Everybody's an empath all of a sudden.
Right.
Thank you for saying that, though. Scott. That's good.
What's also interesting about the hyper empathy piece is that it actually allows the reader to actually distance themselves from the social order, right? Like I was thinking about when you made the comment of being responsible for your behavior, and I was like, okay, and what, right? So it's like I'm always interested in getting at the root of things, like, okay, what behavior is considered good and what behavior is considered bad? Why do we consider these things good? Why do we consider these things bad? Where does right and wrong come into this? Because there's things that are going on that in this world, as ugly and post-apocalyptic as it is. It's like I always look at it for like, why does it make sense that people would do this, right? However horrible it is, why does it make sense for them to do this? And so like, and then I see your hyper empathy, and I'm like, for the world to work for someone with hyper empathy, for you to have a society of people who are hyper empathic, you would have a totally different sense of right and wrong. Violence would have a completely different resonance.
Right.
But that's
absolutely.
That's the point that Lauren makes in the book when she's trying to explain to Ben Cole, about her hyper emphatic self. He being a doctor and a regular, I think, medical doctor. I think he said he was family practitioner or something. And he told her, yes, I've studied that. So at least he knew what she was talking about. And I think that helped her bond even further than the daddy issues.
Issues.
And then the fact that she goes into situations where she has to wreak violence on the world to survive, and it amplifies within her, speaks more to the action-oriented being that she is, right? And I love everybody. Go ahead.
I did when I was reading it. I never interpreted her hyper emphatic self with either good and bad or right and wrong. In my mind, I took it just like any other supernatural character that I read about, whether it's a shapeshifter or a magic person with magic or a witch, or that's the way I viewed it. And maybe I viewed it that way because I had read her other works first.
Well,
that do have supernatural characters. So that's the way I looked at it. I just didn't look at it like a right and wrong or moralistic thing. You know what I mean?
That's how I looked at her character first, until I came across this one quote in the book. But if everyone could feel everyone else's pain, who would torture? Who would cause anyone unnecessary pain? And that's, in my head, that's when it shifted from a supernatural ability to right and wrong.
I could see that. I can see that. I
think it's interesting
over that part, I guess.
is I think we're also assuming that combat has to be about inflicting pain, right? I mean, there are things that you do to incapacitate someone. There are also things you do to subdue them that don't involve pain. And that's why I keep coming to
somebody without some pain. No, really.
That's actually what the sport of wrestling is very much about, right? A lot of the moves are about subduing people, not necessarily incapacitating them through causing them pain. In wrestling, yes, people do experience pain, but it's not this. It's different. And then and I think that what's interesting about it is that it's not this idea that it would render conflict like something that people wouldn't do. No, what it would do is it would change the nature of conflict, right?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Yeah.
So in a sense, we're not blowing each other up with nuclear weapons right now because we know the cost to everybody.
Right. Yeah.
So so at that scale,
awful close though.
So Vanessa, did you want to comment any more on what you had said, or?
No, I think that was
did we
No. It was good because I think that if anything, like again, that takeaway point with regard to empathy and sort of, I think that Lauren's hyper sharing and empathy is like empathy in its purest form and not the way that it's been co-opted. So like, if I am truly empathic and I'm experiencing something the way that you do, I don't get to choose what that is. And I think that the way like empathy has been co-opted is sort of like to Cianna's point, how people use it in a manipulative way. I'm empathic because I want something. And for Lauren, it's kind of all just like, she's sort of like, she has no control over it. But the thing that I think is also just sort of an interesting paradox is I think that, understanding something from someone else's perspective is just, it's not possible because I can't jump inside your brain and think about things like you do. I always have a filter. I always filter it through my own stuff. And so the way that this was written, it almost is like supernatural because this would never be a real thing. Because I don't think we can ever do that. Right. Go ahead.
But also, if you recall, there's at least 2 different conversations, and I'm not really clear where they occur, where she explains to us and to others with her that her abilities are the product of drug use by her mother, her birth mother. So she looks at it like a side effect because she was interested to know if she had children, would her children inherit the side effect? And the Emery, when she realized that both Emery and Mora, the 2 slaves with the small children, they both had the same hyper emphatic selves, and their children did as well. So that's why I didn't look at it like it was a moral type thing. You know what I mean? Because she has expressed to others that it's her mother took this and she names the drug and the doctor says, oh yeah, I know about it, So that's why I looked at it more like a natural physical thing.
Yeah,
Like shapeshifters, you know, they can shift because there's a physical gene in them or something. Whatever.
I thought that the hyper empathy thing. Go ahead.
Something right quick to
Please
Vanessa.
do.
I love all those little dollies up there behind you. Awesome. Every time you're on the screen, I'm just looking at them.
There you
Thank you. I
go.
appreciate it.
They are really, really good. Okay.
Thank
sorry.
Oh no, I just want to say that when I was reading about the hyper empathy bit of Lauren's character, I felt Octavia was amplifying a characteristic of humanity that we just don't pay enough attention to, and by forcing Lauren to have to, what's that?
Third eye.
Third eye, don't you?
Exactly. And so for her to present a character who actually has to manage her empathy, Octavia is teaching us that that's what you guys are doing every day.
That's
right?
true. Why does she put the
Good
drug?
point.
Why does she put the drug part in it? See, that's what's got me. Simply because I do write crime fiction.
Yeah.
I deal with criminals and shit. So
Right.
that's the part that's really, there's something else working there. I think.
Well, does it go back to cause and effect?
Mm.
So the effect is she has this hype empathy, and the cause is because her mom was on drugs.
Exactly.
Oh,
It's also
interesting, because you can take that differently than the drug having the influence, right? You can take living a life of trauma and seeing someone in a state like that and have it an impact on you that amplifies things in you that wouldn't have been there before. So yeah.
But I think
Have
it's
an
also
impact that
interesting
could
that
ultimately be positive. I mean, all right, so Stanford and the superhero world, do we ever see instances or examples where a traumatic or negative event will lead to somebody having spectacular powers which they use for the betterment of humanity?
That's the
always
invisible man,
Right.
Every origin story ever. Everyone ever.
That's true. Yeah.
But it's
We have
to me,
cracked
what's
the code.
interesting about setting this one up is that empathy is in a category of superpowers which I find to be intriguing in that there are a series of superpowers that are very difficult for comic writers to put in the hands of heroes because they violate a lot of our assumptions about right and wrong, right? And these are and so it's mind control, it's empathy, it's invisibility, you know, and it's because they have, in some way, they violate those powers, create characters that violate the social contract just by being, right?
That's a good point.
And so I think that to have a power that violates the social contract, because it gives her a huge advantage over other beings that they can't even perceive, right?
Yeah.
That's the problem with telepathy. It's like, can we trust a telepath? Well, yeah. Well, that's what trust really is. You really, truly have to trust a telepath, right? It's the same thing with shape-shifting is that power as well, right? You don't know who you're dealing with, right?
Right.
And so what's interesting is that, like, yes, there's a trauma that gives birth to powers, which is very standard. But it's that it's a trauma that is built on a violation of social order that gives her a power that makes her perpetually violate the social order just by being. That to me is interesting.
But in Lauren's case, though, her power debilitates her. Because if somebody's shot, she feels the shot. When somebody she hit that dude in the back of the head, she was killing him with the rock. She felt that, and she was kind of out for a bit. So she's debilitated with hers too.
It does.
But it's not
doesn't
always
debilitate
bad.
her.
It's not always pain.
That's
And her
Right.
When she was having sex,
superpowers.
though.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She felt those good feelings.
But she was a leader. Remember as a kid, she was a leader.
Her superpower is simultaneously her kryptonite.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's really common.
Yeah, exactly.
And I do think to that piece about, you know, bringing in the drug sort of, etiology and that's why she's this way. I think that almost brings the hyper empathy from so far within the realm of the supernatural, like closer to us. And I think that when we talk about like hero stories and stuff like that, like it's easier for me to identify with a hero that's closer to me than like Superman. Like Batman is closer to us because, you know, he doesn't have superpowers, even though he's in the top 1%, like whatever.
Right.
But I think that sort of, I too had issues with a lot of the way that the drug use was sort of portrayed in the book, just, you know, whatever, just had issues with it. But I think that sort of cause and effect piece brought like, okay, that could happen. You know what I'm saying? That's more.
It makes it believable.
Oh, I mean, it could happen. And think about when the book was written. The book was written it was published really towards the end of a crack epidemic.
Exactly.
So, I mean, this was the reality in which, you know, Octavia Butler was creating the story.
Okay.
And it's also,
go ahead, please.
I also think that there's a lot of interesting things about her bringing drugs into it, because ultimately, what's happening is we don't. Drugs are a way in which we are able to take control of our bodies and our senses that are beyond our natural abilities, right? So I think what's interesting is that, you know, because those aren't because drugs are throughout here, but inevitably the drugs are being used to alter, you know, like we talk about altering our consciousness, right? But we never talk about what it means to alter your consciousness. It means that you are using a technology to change your relationship to the world. And what does that say about the world when you feel the need to do something like that?
No, very well said. Very well said. Okay, Elle Marie, why is this book so good?
Well, I have a confession. So this is a reread for me. And the first time I read the book, it wasn't that good to me. It wasn't. And not that I didn't like it, but it was, okay, that was a good book. Okay, next.
Same.
It was just, it was just okay. And being in the literary world, everyone just absolutely loves Octavia Butler, and she is a fantastic writer. But the character of Lauren, I don't know if it's because I didn't relate to her or what it was, but it kind of fell flat for me the first time around. And of course, I think the time and age had a lot to do with it too. So rereading it this go round, here the book begins in 2024, 2027. I'm thinking, shit, it's 2020.
We better get ready.
Right. And I'm
get
thinking,
that travel bag ready.
Right. So I'm thinking, let me get my go bag ready, like Lauren had hers.
Exactly.
Don't you have one in your car?
I do. I actually keep it in the trunk.
In your new car.
Yes, I do, in the trunk.
There you go.
But this time, and of course I think it is because of time, because I'm thinking, okay, a lot of this doesn't seem that far-fetched. Some of this really seems like it really can happen in the next 4 to 7 years.
Yes.
No.
And that's what made it a little bit scary this go round. And also that's what made it good this go round for me.
2024, eh?
Yeah.
I gotta tell you, the frequency that I noticed of Octavia using the word privatization,
Yes,
was stunning, because I would argue that our culture has been moving towards an increasingly privatized culture for the past 40 years. And for her to recognize that in the mid 90s, when really it had only been going that way for 10, 15 years.
Oh,
and
the way she
dust out oh my God. Exactly.
But the way she described the politicians.
Yes.
24. I mean,
yes.
And I had to keep looking. When was this? When did she?
Right.
You know?
Right.
Yeah.
That's like all these different currents that she's able to bring together in this book is for me stunning. So let's all continue to comment on Elle Marie's point about contemporary relevance. Or
I mean,
Well,
you know.
for me, I mean, I read Parable and Kindred in high school. So this was like, I think it was my junior or senior year in high school. It was like 98.
Y'all just read a book one time and that's it? Y'all don't read
Most of the time.
if a book is good, you don't reread it?
I don't.
Did that.
It's too many other books out here I haven't read. I can't backtrack all the time.
Hey.
I first read Kindred and Parable the Sower when I was in high school, which is like 1998, 1999, where
Baby.
I was in I was in high school, a predominantly white high school in Westchester County, New York. So, I mean, in the pop culture that I was consuming in my environment, there were not a lot of African-American heroines at all. So this was, I think, my first exposure to Black girl magic, as it were. Again, Octavia Butler just being absolutely amazing and prophetic. This whole concept of, you know, these very powerful Black women with magic, you know, just coming out of them and their ability to do amazing things and really just survive. I found really, really amazing. And these are very catastrophic situations. This is, you know, between, especially like in Kindred, but there is this ability to survive and this ability to create hope and draw on hope in situations where the very idea of a future is often doubt. So I find that really, really, really amazing about her work and the heroines that she created.
That's fantastic.
I'd be interested to know, like, based on what you just said, Cianna, like Lauren going along the journey, like disguised as a man. For me, I was kind of like, okay, like I understand the safety, you know what I'm saying? But to me, not that it was bad, but I thought that there would be more of a, like, when everyone found out that she was not a man. And I also just thought about, like, thematically, and again, I will situate myself. I'm a millennial in 1998. I'm not even going to tell you how old I was. I'm not even going to tell you. But it was like, it was I don't know. I don't know if it diminished it for me because she sort of was like under this guise, even though I understood why. You know what I'm saying? Like the Black girl magic, like, it was there.
I mean, I love that. I mean, I think I have myself a very androgynous look, and you know what I mean? I got my ears pierced when I was really, really young. I had a very, very short afro. To get my ears pierced because everybody thought I was a little boy. I mean, that's, you know, my ability to shapeshift. That, you know, catch me on the right Saturday morning at the grocery store.
I like that idea.
I get a lot of, yes, sir. It's like, no, I just.
Well, that whole idea of shape-shifting is so Earthseed, right?
Right.
Adaptation, you know, Bruce Lee called it being like water, dare I say.
Right.
But no, that's fantastic.
I think, you know, so many of her characters assume other shapes and other identities, that when I was reading her in the 90s, in the 80s, in the 2000s, I have always identified with Miss Butler's, I won't use the word need, but her wish, I'll put it that way, to change to something other than yourself, to wish for a community or surroundings or the world that was different than what it is. Because, you know, for Black people, it hasn't always been very pleasant in this country. So that's the reason why I have always read all of her books. And but I'm just that way. You know, I've read the Red Badge of Courage. I know you had to read that, but way back in junior high. I've read it probably 200 times because I love that book. It's so profound to me. The writing of it, how he felt, what he was talking about and everything. But for me, that's what I like about this book and her other books as well. She, to me, I get the longing in her that she wants to, be other than. And I'm not saying she didn't love herself or anything, and that's not what I'm saying at all. It's just that there is this desire, but when you're right to like project and be other than, like, I mentioned I write crime fiction. I kill up a bunch of people because and so when I'm reading all the violence and stuff in this, I'm going, yeah, I know she would do that. But I really like that about all of her writing, though, and that is that yearning, and that's the only word I can think of that even comes close to what I'm trying to say, in her, that she was trying to portray to others.
So, well, I actually contextualize. I don't necessarily feel that it's just about change. I think that sometimes like changing and being other. I've always felt, and I think what's interesting is this could just be just a personal thing, or it could be a more general thing. But I think that we don't identify what we mean by change sometimes, and I think that what I'm seeing are characters that are growing into something that's always been a part of them that's been hidden, right? So I'm not seeing it as changing into something. I see it as just as more of an evolutionary growth that's happening at an accelerated pace, right? Because I'm not seeing, because I don't get this. I don't feel like Wilhelmina is like a fundamentally different person at the end. I just feel like she's kind of like we're seeing like at the beginning we see her exterior only, and as we get to the end we see her interior. Well, and once we recognize that interior, we look at the exterior differently.
What I really, my reaction is that her, what Jennifer called longing, right? What I love about that is Octavia's actually made that the fundamental principle of the universe by calling God change, right? In other words, instead of lamenting, she's not presenting herself as though I'm this and I want to be that. What she's saying is the most fundamental principle of all things is change, and I am that. And not only am I that, I know that, and I need to make everybody else know that, right?
And God is change.
No.
What's that? No, God has changed, absolutely.
Oh yeah, that's what LM said. But yeah, bingo. That's yeah. There you go.
Okay, Stanford, why is this book so good?
The construction of kin. I mean, that's what I was talking about earlier, but that's really what I love about this book is this idea that the journey is about about establishing new connections.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that I don't know if we're gonna, I don't want to steal anybody's thunder, but Sistah Jay, you mentioned it, the daddy issues and her relationship with Bankole, and it was kind of like the therapist in me was like, ooh, but then it was also like,
I bet.
She's 18, like, and I thought about it, like,
not even
the way you're saying,
57. He's 57. That's the issue.
She grown though, but I think
not grown.
Little grown.
Right.
Little grown.
18.
To Stanford's point about Ken, though, it's kind of like the other thing that I thought was change was like she didn't bat an eye, getting with Bankole and doing all that. And even when he had this whole like, oh my God, you're a child, you're only 18. She was like, and what? And I wonder, like, with the world and everything like being in such disarray, like, how does that affect the way that we view sort of like societal, what's acceptable, you know what I'm saying? What, you know what I'm saying? Like, into Stanford's point about like, who do we accept as our kin and who do we make as our family? Like, the fact that, you know, someone who's 18 and someone who's 57 is gross to us by our society standards. But in this sort of post-apocalyptic, we're walking, what's going on, is it gross? You know what I'm saying?
No.
Like, is it,
Okay. It seems
like,
to me that that's only because of standards today. Octavia Butler was in her young late teens and 20s in the 60s. And the beginning of the 70s, when everybody got with everybody, hippie generation, big fros. I had my big fro too. Mine was bigger than Angela Davis. And I'm like 5 feet tall, so you know I look like a little bug with all that hair. But she grew up in an era where it was like, you know, they view this time as free love, free sex, free pills, free everything, you know. And that's just the time period that she came of age in and grew up in. So even writing the character of Lauren and in her other books as well, sex is not a taboo thing for her in her stories. In almost all of her stories. So
when that relationship happened later in the book, that's when I started to experience her as a goddess. And what I mean by that is she is so completely in control of her world and her body. Sex is a part of her life. She's going to have a relationship with whomever she wants.
Exactly.
It's not disposable.
And wasn't it interesting? She was really, they both laughed about the fact that they both had a condom.
Yeah.
They both had a condom. So, you know, that's just a part of their little world. I really liked that scene, though, because I thought, yeah, that was really hilarious.
That's pretty progressive at that time, too.
Right.
I mean, really, you know. Think
ahead of her time.
It's just like also, I used to tell people all the time, you have to, you know, people, these young kids running around quoting Nietzsche and Socrates and this and that, but you have to also look at the time period that these people lived and existed and the things going on around them. We do not live in a vacuum. We don't write in a vacuum either. No. We don't think in a vacuum. So, you know.
But I think what's interesting when you look at it from our current perspective, right? Because I would argue that to some degree, much of the past 20 years in terms of relations between age and also gender relations in America has been about boundaries, about establishing more defined boundaries and giving people more control of the boundaries around themselves, right? I mean, I look at that in terms of, and I don't think it's bad, right? I just think it just is, right? It's just it's the way that we have chosen to deal with certain emerging issues, right? You know, and I accept that there's probably other ways to do it, but you know, this is where we're at. What's interesting is if you look at our culture, which has the strong sense of like fixation or anxieties around boundaries, right? You know, seeing that relationship because it potentially violates all sorts of boundaries makes that relationship much more symbolic much more symbolic in terms of the novel itself, right? Because it actually changes the way, like if they had been the same age, we would have seen it as a conforming relationship. And the fact that it's a non-conforming relationship it fits in the narrative for us. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily what Octavia Butler intended when she wrote it, but I think that's an interesting element of kind of what happens when in the present you read a book that was written with a sensibility from a different time, and then you're struggling with the reinterpretation. And sometimes you can create some interesting interpretations or some interesting effects that you wouldn't have otherwise.
I kind of experienced their relationship and her eventual being with him as a partner as sort of, this is who you have to be if you're going to be with me.
I didn't view it that way at all. I viewed it exactly like exactly like I viewed it the first time I read the book.
Yeah.
It was way back in the 90s. And that is, she was with him because she had daddy issues. Her daddy that she was very devoted to is dead. He was dead when she started on the journey. She had all these other people that was close to her age interacting with her, and some little bitty small kids. I mean, Natividad, she called her, was nursing the little baby and everything, you know. And here comes
like daddy issues, or is she just able to relate with?
I think
is that necessarily a negative thing?
So what does daddy issues mean, right?
Exactly.
That's just the way I looked at it.
Yeah, let's define daddy issues.
Right.
Well, I think she gravitated to him almost immediately because he was the age of her dad. He was very, he was quietly assertive like her dad. Yeah. I mean, he didn't yik yak all the time, you know, give gab and stuff all the time. But when he spoke, then he spoke when he had something to say. You know what I mean?
Wasn't very often. Was anybody kind of just like Curtis, not really sure why he was there in the first place? Maybe not the
I know. In the Curtis was dead pretty quick. Or we assume he was dead.
He was dead.
You know, it just wasn't aimed. I just didn't get it. I didn't.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you got them throwaway characters, but for me anyway, that's the way I interpreted her response to him. And it seemed to be just a logical progression because, I mean, they're not related or anything.
Right.
And I mean, she, as we've already pointed out, she probably looked upon sex just like, well, that's what you do. You know, that's a part of nature of human beings, and that's a part of life, like the circle of life.
Yeah.
It's very healthy.
Yes, that's where we always need to start when we're talking about sex, right? It's healthy and it's good. Start there and then let everything go crazy after that if you want.
Anyway, that's the way I looked at it.
Okay, so Jennifer, why is this book so good?
Why is this book so good to me? Well, first of all, I've read it about 10, 15 times in my lifetime thus far. So,
wow.
I really like Octavia Butler. I've read all of her books. I think the only thing I haven't read is somebody put out some essays or something after she died, and I don't have that one though. But anyway, I liked it, as I pointed out first, because I'm trying to think back to the first time I read it. It was one of the first books that I read by an author who was Black like me, from a first person point of view, but it wasn't I, me. You know what I mean? I got complete sense of, or at least I felt like I had a complete mental picture of the view of the neighborhood, of the people in the neighborhood. I thought she did a really good job of depicting the personalities of her family members without saying, and he did this, he did this, he did this. You know what I mean? That's impressive to me. But my favorite quote I wrote down, because this shit is funny. It was funny. When I read it, I was like cracking up, because it, to me, is so true. She says, and I forget who she was talking to when she said this. But anyway, she says, God is trickster, teacher, chaos, clay. We decide which aspect we embrace and deal with the others. And that's exactly like a life is. Isn't that the truth?
That's exactly
Isn't that the truth?
And sometimes you don't know you're choosing. Right?
But I like the fact that she described, this character described God as a trickster.
Yes.
Everybody always says, he's the creator, he's this, and he created the universe and blah, blah, blah. But to me, that just made God more real to me for her. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's one of my major resonance points.
And then I did like the fact that I thought it was really cool how she begins with, the daddy's a Baptist minister, but I'm resisting that religion because I got my own thing.
Mm-hmm.
I got Earthseed, the Books of the Living. I love that title. But anyway,
Exactly.
But at the very end, how does it end? Luke chapter 8, verses 5-8, which is the parable of the sower
Mm-hmm.
from the Bible. I just love that though. Yeah.
No, it's fantastic.
That great Earthseed quote, a tree cannot grow in its parent's shadow.
Exactly.
Yes.
And then didn't you find it? But I like stories where there's all that continuity there. And what did they name their little new community? Acorn. Isn't that just awesome?
Yeah,
I love
it's
it.
fantastic.
All that
Fantastic.
symbology. I just love it. And so I always ask myself, reading all of and especially her Earthseed quotes, and I am just so in awe of her skill and the process that she wrote all this. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely.
It's just fantastic.
Yeah, when we're talking, and a question for everybody. I mean, this is a very prescient tale, and for those who are rereading, and as we're reading this book in the midst of a pandemic,
oh goodness,
crazy election, was anyone taking notes about edible plants? Gonna make so.
You know what though? Okay, see, my grandma.
Where were they going?
Okay, y'all need to come down to Dallas
There you go.
my grandma was part Native American. She used to take us out in the country. I know all about herbs and stuff. She made everything. She picked plants. She picked this. She picked that. Hey, keep it straight. Yeah. And I'm not going to tell you, LM, but LM is very knowledgeable in teas. Any kind of tea for any kind of thing. You ask LM. She know everything about a tea.
No, I loved how, I remember the scene where she showed the one girl the book and she said, take this book with you because things are going to get bad. And then it got back to her and her dad sat with her and talked to her like a peer.
Yeah.
I loved it. They both were peers in that world of empirical detail. Mm-hmm. And that she took from her old man, right? Yes. And he told her, you cannot tell people these things.
Everybody can't handle the truth.
Exactly. Which she learned later when she said God's a trickster, right?
Yeah.
I mean, she learned later you're one and you abide the rest. But I just to go back to I love that relationship with her father. There was work that they did together and he knew she was the one other person around who got it. He didn't have to manage her. He had to manage the boy, right? He had to manage Keith and try to, but he did not have to manage her. And I just love that peer-like relationship they had, even though...
I like how at the end of that conversation, as a peer, he switched on Paramount really quickly. You need to get my book back.
You go get it.
That is always the last word. Get my stuff. Exactly.
How did y'all feel about the fact that in the overall story, since that relationship was so important, and we begin with that, and I think we end with that because she's with the dude that's just like her daddy. They never showed his death.
Yes.
They just never, he just never came back.
That was actually
hurt me. That hurt me to my core.
Yes.
I know.
I found that so hurtful because I wanted to know. I wanted some resolution. You know.
Do you think
now,
there was
has anyone read Parable of the Talents, book 2?
Yes.
So does the dad not come up, I guess?
Well, let's not. I mean.
Okay.
All right. Fair enough.
No spoiler.
No spoilers.
No spoilers.
Okay.
I mean, I actually liked that. I liked that. I liked that there was a lack of resolution because, in some ways, that in a lot of ways, that really, as I look back on it, it really resonated with me in terms of how special it is when you get resolution after a death, right? I think that we assume that that's somehow our birthright to get this resolution, but that's not how it works in nature, and that's really not how. I think that's something that our society builds a lot of infrastructure around trying to assure, but the reality is it's not there. And I think that that's one thing that the pandemic has really driven home, right?
Oh, Lord. Yeah.
Look at all the people who are dying. And I had a close friend die very early on in this. It wasn't of COVID, but he died in a hospital, and it was like an outpatient procedure. It was like one of those things where like they didn't expect it. It was a complication. And so he just drove to the hospital, get the biopsy, and he didn't come back. And his wife and child were not allowed to go pick up the body.
Wow.
This is the beginning of March. And just talking about it with some of their close friends, and we were kind of grappling with it. And it's like, unfortunately, that is a much more natural death in some ways.
Yeah.
That you go wandering out in the woods and that predator just comes and snatches you up, right? Predator doesn't bring the body back to you.
No.
I mean, and that's something that we're also having to come to grips with in the context of a pandemic where like one of the things that we are truly denied is the funeral rites.
Right.
We're denied that.
Yeah.
And I think that just go ahead, Scott.
No, you go.
Okay. And I think there's just one more, just to sort of like feed off of that too. I think in addition to that non-resolution, I think, Lauren says God has changed, I think, and change is inevitable. So is uncertainty. And I think that is something that the pandemic, that's why everybody losing their shit because of all I'm sorry. Because of all the
I do it all the time.
Please continue.
But all the uncertainty, and I think that is one thing that even though in me, I'm just like you, Sistah Jay, like where's her dad? Like what is going on? But I think that uncertainty is something that is unavoidable. It is constant. It is always there. I'm 100% certain of everything within me and 0% of everything that's without me. And I think that as people, especially in the Western world, we try to exert so much control over things that to sort of cope with that uncertainty. So like, like some of the people that, she met along the way and how were they coping with the uncertainty of what was going on. Whereas I think the beauty of Earthseed is that she just embraced it. She was like, yes. I don't know what's going on, but that's what's up, So I think that it's sort of similar to what Stanford is talking about with regard to not getting that resolution. It's not attaining certainty. Whereas I would argue, and I think Lauren would argue, that it's always like that. We never get that. We never get that resolution, and we never attain any level of certainty. The only certain thing is that God has changed. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, when he didn't come back in the story, I thought that amplified Lauren's longing, right? If there was a sense of of longing, as you said, and I got to imagine that has a much different psychological impact than actually, seeing the body. And there's this longing just can't be satisfied no matter what you do.
Maybe also a glimmer of hope.
Yes. No, absolutely.
Yes.
As well. And that's maybe always a negative thing.
That's how I looked at it.
That's what she has for her brothers too, because because even though Zara saw Curtis, even though Zara saw her brothers and her stepmother dead, but nobody saw Curtis, and she didn't see Curtis, but he's not there, so she doesn't know. Just like the dad, she doesn't know.
Right.
These are two people that she loved. So she was going to marry Curtis before all that stuff happened. So
but even she admits that uncertainty and not knowing hurt her worse than her brother. And that was certain. You saw him, or you saw how he heard how he looked. That was certain, but not knowing hurt her more.
And I think that that's definitely something that, like, uncertainty is one of those things. Like, it is what it is, and then we as individuals, based on all of our shit, ascribe a meaning and a value to it. So for Lauren, it's like, I need the certain, that makes me feel better, but for, you know, in another case, someone, it could be different. And so I think that that's another thing that I think was sort of like that she owns throughout the book, is like, okay, this is my value that I'm, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yes.
She is like owning that piece of it, you know what I'm saying? And I think that that's, again, for people who are in the pandemic right now dealing with uncertainty, it's kind of like the way that people deal with that. We can talk about this a different day, but masking versus not, you know, and the way that people are dealing with that, I think.
I saw the funniest picture today. Someone posted on our group, somebody had a picture of a man with a water gun.
Oh, that was Zombie Scotty.
That was you? That was so good. It's a man with a water gun, and he's filling his water gun with sanitizer and say, okay, you unmasking people.
I'm tired of y'all.
That was so funny.
No, I think the thing about uncertainty there is Octavia's then really personally struggling to get a culture where, as Stanford said, all we do is create borders, and we create more and more borders in the quest for certainty. And
think about from her point of view, though. She's a Black woman who grew up in the 50s and 60s who writes science fiction. At the time she was writing all of these wonderful stories, there's like Isaac Asimov, he was huge. Frederick Heinlein, he was a huge science. All these men, science fiction writers who got all the accolades and stuff.
You know, it's amazing that you said it's absolutely amazing
that you Parker Genius Grant though.
that contrast is so terribly important, because when you read Asimov, it's nothing but millennia after millennia after millennia with very few empirical details about lived life. It's all about Harry Seldon.
I like his stuff, though. I've read all his stuff.
I don't disagree.
It's just
what's that?
Foundation is good too. If you haven't read Foundation,
it is. At the same time, you never get to know anyone. I mean, someone comes around 1,000 years later. No, I get it. But what I love about this book is it's just the empirical detail. I need this. I need all these things you see behind me are the list. This. I am in this world completely. And you know what? My dad and I are in this world completely, like no one else is. Everybody else, I'm sorry, but we're suffering them. You know, right? She suffers Corey. She suffers Keith.
Yeah, she does.
Right? She does.
And she suffers everybody she meets, except that final man she meets at the end. Right? So for me, I think she found a peer at the end, right? I mean, daddy issues, whatever.
Found her daddy at the end.
And all, fair enough. Anybody else have any final comments about why the book is so good?
Because
I do want to share
Octavia Butler.
Fair enough.
I do want to share a quote that was so relevant to the times in the pandemic. Survive. I don't know whether good times are coming back again, but I know that won't matter if we don't survive these times.
There you go. There you go.
As we say on our podcast.
A boop on Dark Loops. Hold on. My status is like, you know, dude, I'm going to have a whole 40 hits next week. So now that we're exchanging quotes, there's one I just have to share. And it's, everyone knows that change is inevitable, from the second law of thermodynamics to Darwinian evolution, from Buddhism's insistence that nothing is permanent and all suffering results from our delusions of permanence, to the third chapter of Ecclesiastes, to everything there is a season. Change is part of life, of existence, of the common wisdom. But I don't believe we're dealing with all that. I don't believe we're dealing with all that means. We haven't begun to deal with it. For me, that's the take home, right? As we're living these illusions of stability, our best science is telling us that change is part of what reality is, right? And a lot of scientists still don't even talk that way, right? And for her to be able to take all of this empirical raw lived life and wrap it up in the second law of thermodynamics and Buddhism and tell a compelling human story, it's not an analytic philosophical paper.
Right.
That rides the back of this fantastic human story. That's just a huge accomplishment. So that about wraps it up for us. Thanks to this wonderful collection of brilliant Parable of the Sower fans for joining me in tonight's discussion. Panelists, please tell the audience where they can find you on social media.
You can find me on Twitter at _Sistah Jay, just the letter J. Or you can visit my website at jenniferlewiswilliams.com. And you can find my books on my website. They are, my first book I wrote was A Murder Among Friends. That's my favorite one.
Very good book.
Mine too.
I've read that. Yeah.
My second book was The Highland Games Murder. My third book is the first book in a detective series that I'm doing. It's called Dirty Daniel. And the second book just launched in that series called Nasty Nevin.
That's fantastic.
I know, and it's good too.
That's
that
cool.
one.
Stanford, where can we find you?
I'm pretty easy to find on Facebook. Just go Stanford Carpenter. There's lots of Stanfords, there's lots of Carpenters, but there is no Stanford Carpenter but me.
Write that down.
There you go. Cianna, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at CC Greaves. That's at CICIGREA, V as in Victor, ES as in Sam. I do not really tweet a lot because people on Twitter are very mean. So you will find a lot of retweets. It's a really interesting mashup of pop culture, foreign policy, and stolen memes.
Fantastic. Elle Marie.
He said stolen memes.
Stolen.
I will steal your memes and shamelessly share them and not even tag you in them.
That's awesome.
Love it.
I have no home training.
Oh, you're supposed to tag them when you take the meme? I got to catch up.
Oh my gosh. I can be found on Twitter at Literary Marie and also at _Sistah LM and also literarymarie.com.
Excellent. Vanessa.
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at drvanessa_Hintz. That is HINTZ as in zebra. Also on Facebook, Dr. Vanessa Hintz.
Fantastic. You can find me on Twitter at @dark_loops. You can find all episodes of Dark Loops, Why Is This So Good on YouTube at the Dark Loops Productions channel. If you'd like to leave feedback about this podcast, please leave it below on this YouTube page or send a message to darkloopsproductions@gmail.com. We'll be sure to read it at the end of our next podcast. So there it is. From all of us to all of you, big hugs. And remember, change is
is
part
a
of
part
our
of
life.
That was worse.
Bye-bye.
Bye.